What if you can take the precision of biology and what Mother Nature has created and apply it to the industrial throughput that you see with traditional chemical manufacturing?
It's an approach which actually consumes carbon. It doesn't emit carbon. I think that would be a really important contribution to the chemicals industry.
I think there is a second wave coming, and I hope Solugen is part of that second wave, where we can make chemicals one of the high-growth industries again.
The scale of the opportunity is vast. It's so big it's a non-issue. Chemicals go into everything.
Hello and welcome to Season 3 of Invest in Progress, brought to you by the Scottish Mortgage team. I'm Claire Shaw, Portfolio Director. In this podcast, we take you behind the scenes to hear the conversations that take place between the Scottish mortgage managers and the leaders of some of the world's most exceptional growth companies. As we are a UK investment trust, we can only market Scottish Mortgage to certain audiences and in certain jurisdictions. Check out the podcast description to ensure this content is suitable for you. And as with any investment, your capital is at risk. Look around. Every object you see, every object you interact with, is because of the chemicals industry. It is a $6 trillion sector that has been the backbone of modern civilization, touching almost every aspect of our daily lives. Yet this immense size and scale comes with a heavy price. It's one of the most polluting industries on the planet. And the issues don't stop at pollution. Companies operating in this space are riddled with inefficient processes that not only waste resources, but also exacerbate its environmental impact. However, whilst incumbents try and squeeze out more profit by making incremental improvements here and there, there's a company ripping up the rulebook and starting from scratch. Meet Solugen, a company revolutionising the chemicals industry through its innovative use of bio-based technology and machine learning. What started as a homemade reactor using PVC pipes from Home Depot is now a tried and tested business model, catching the attention of industry giants and the US Department of Energy. So today we are excited to welcome co-founder and CEO Gaurav Chakrabarti to talk to Scottish mortgage manager Tom Slater. Afterwards, Tom and I will discuss the investment case of Solugen as a holding in the portfolio. But until then, I'll hand over to Tom and Gaurav.
Gaurav, we're delighted to have you with us here today. It's a long way to come from Texas, so really appreciate you coming to Edinburgh.
Well, thanks for having me. It's my first time here.
So can you start by explaining what Solugen does, what problem it is that the company is trying to solve?
Really, what we're trying to do is decarbonize the production of materials and chemicals. If you look at the chemicals industry, it's responsible for 30% of all industrial greenhouse gas emissions and 6% of overall emissions in the world. What we're trying to do at Solugen is ask a very fundamental question, a simple question, which is, what would it take to get that number to be zero, perhaps negative? And that's it. And the way that we're solving this problem is, before we were talking about the Medici effect and bringing solutions from different fields, we're solving it using lessons learned from the human body, from cancer biology. And that turned out is the best way to actually decarbonize this industry, is to take lessons from Mother Nature that have evolved for millions of years and apply it to the industrial setting to actually create products that are low carbon, potentially negative carbon, and actually more profitable to make.
So tell us, and you sort of alluded to it there, tell us the backstory to the founding of Solugen, because I think most people will be surprised to find out that it was a game of poker that brought you and your co-founder, Sean, together.
Yeah. So let's see, 2016, the company spun out of MIT, but I was actually studying pancreatic cancer. I'm a physician scientist and discovered this reaction in pancreatic cancer that makes pretty critical chemicals like hydrogen peroxide and acids and things of that nature. And I thought it was just a very cool quirk of cancer, right? Cancer is a very difficult to treat disease, particularly pancreatic cancer. And it just so happened that this enzyme, which is an enzyme is just something that makes reactions go fast. makes these chemicals, and that's all I thought it was, an interesting curiosity at the time. But we had this long-standing poker game in medical school, and sitting next to me was my best friend, Sean Hunt, who was at MIT doing his PhD on the production of hydrogen peroxide and acids at massive industrial scales. And we did what one does at poker games, which is talk science, naturally. Right. So we started talking about science and kind of what we were doing in the lab. And he stopped me and he said, that's really interesting. I said, why is that interesting? He said, well, that's just a very unique way of looking at the problem. So we put our heads together after everyone had left the poker table because they didn't want to be around us anymore. We're insufferable together. But basically, we started to scheme of this idea that, well, what if you can marry the two disciplines? What if you can take the precision of biology and what Mother Nature has created and apply it to the industrial throughput that you see with traditional chemical manufacturing. And so put our heads together. We entered the MIT 100K pitch competition, which we lost, which we did not win. You basically, the winner would have gotten $100,000. We lost. We got $10,000. So we went to Home Depot, our local hardware store, bought some PVC pipes, and built our first reactor. And that's really what started the company of Solugen. And really the vision of that little PVC reactor, what it created was, well, what if there's a world where you can actually have more efficient chemical processes that actually not only are carbon neutral, but potentially carbon negative? And the way that you do that is a distributed network of production facilities. And so long story short, that's really what got us going, was this vision that, hey, we can solve this problem in a very left field way that no one has thought of before, but do it in a way that actually attacks the core of what the issue is, and that's the chemical process.
But you were a physician scientist, but you actually come from a family of people interested in the chemicals industry.
Interested is it's a minor way of putting it. My family is married and entrenched in the chemicals industry. My father, his story is amazing. Basically, I've learned everything about hustle and everything about execution from him. He came from India to America. He was valedictorian of his class in the engineering college. But he didn't speak English very well, so he couldn't get a job at any of the big chemical companies. So he worked at McDonald's, flipping burgers during the day, and at night he would push carts. And then one day there was a recruiter from one of the big chemcos, and naturally he always had some version of a resume with him, a one-pager, and he pulls it out and gives it to them. And then within a week, he gets a call back, and that began his career in the chemicals industry in the United States. And eventually, after working at multiple big chemical companies, he started his own chemical company. In fact, it was a very big chemical company that he started and sold. And I was there along the way, right? He would bring me in every weekend to the lab to formulate chemicals for customers. And that's where I learned about the intersection of technical knowledge and really understanding what customers care about. And so that's really what got me my first bite of the apple, so to speak, into the chemical space. And after that, I swore to him that I'd never be in the chemicals industry. Yet here I am.
I think for many of our listeners, they will be thinking, chemicals, this is a non-sexy industry, not that relevant to me. But it's incredible when you highlight just how embedded chemicals are in our everyday lives. So can you set the scene for the chemicals industry? How does it work today? How do our listeners interface with it?
Yeah. So at the highest level, you can think of every single object that you interact with, this glass that I'm looking at right now, the water that's in this glass, all of it is here because of the chemicals industry. The glass because it's been produced by a chemical process, the water because it's been treated by a chemical process. This table, every little nuance that we interact with is because of the chemicals industry. I actually think of the chemicals industry as the molecule industry, right? It's the fundamental underpinning of everything in society. You talk about energy, you talk about plastics, anything is a molecule at the end of the day, and it is made by a chemical process. Today, we're relegated to what I would say a pretty inefficient chemical process, right? The best-in-class chemical processes, they can take a feedstock i.e., like a petroleum or a natural gas, and go to a product with a yield of at best 60%. That means there's 40% of your starting material, the carbon that was in your starting material, that either ends up in the environment or has to be reworked in your process to actually make your end product. That costs money, costs energy, and that's why the chemicals industry, given its scale, is also one of the most emittive industries in the world. And so if you look at how the actual industry works, it is 100, maybe 150-year-old companies that have been around for, since the discovery of really fundamental chemical reactions. In fact, there was a really interesting thing was in the 1930s and 40s when petrochemistry and synthesis chemistry was starting to come of age. That was like the tech industry. That used to be like a Google or a Fang. It was like, wow, I'm going to go work at a Dow DuPont because that was the hot, cool company at the time. Now, when you look at the chemical industry, it's a completely different world, right? It feels stagnant. It feels like we've hit this plateau of we've perfected everything we can. But I think that's not true. I think there is a second wave coming, and I hope Solugen is part of that second wave where we can make chemicals one of the high growth industries again.
And why have we got to this point where it is ripe for disruption?
We've gotten comfortable with the inefficiencies, I would say. You make enough money. You make enough money at these inefficient processes, meaning a 1% increase in yield at a refinery translates to billions of dollars of bottom line profit. So here, there's just no way for us to go from that 60% yield to that 90% yield unless we completely change the way we look at that process technology. And right now, the CapEx is already installed. We've already paid for massive refineries, massive chemical plants. So every incremental improvement is just a bottom line view. So that complacency is that, well, we've already got this asset base. We don't need to create a new asset base. Let's just eke out every dollar of profit that we can. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think fundamentally we have to reinvent the way that we produce the chemical and not just eke out another percentage of margin.
So your mission is to decarbonize the chemical industry. It's no mean feat. So just explain in very high level terms the science behind how you plan to do this.
Where's the whiteboard? No, It's really, we've invented this new technology. It's called the chemi-enzymatic process. Rolls right off the tongue, but it's quite simple. We take the catalysts found in nature, enzymes they're called. We produce them at scale, and we marry them with catalysts found in industry that are called heterogeneous metal catalysts, which sounds really fancy, but it's just metal. That's all it is. And the technology is marrying these two, marrying the catalysts that are naturally found in nature with the catalysts that we've deployed for years at industrial scale. And by doing so, our yield percentage is no longer 60%. We have proven at commercial scale that our yield is north of 90%. In fact, our facility, one of our facilities in Houston, is at a 96% yield from feedstock to product. Never been done before. And so that's really how the technology works, is a more efficient way of converting a feedstock into your end product.
And just to clarify, an enzyme is a part of that reaction from feedstock to end product. Exactly. that is not consumed in that reaction. It facilitates the reaction. Exactly. It helps it go faster. So you do that better than other people.
We do that significantly better than other people, at least 30% better from a summation perspective. But I would say the way that I look at it is our goal is to reuse our catalyst, i.e. our enzyme and metal, as much as possible. That's what gives you the scale and gives you the throughput that makes this a profitable endeavor. Yeah.
And you sort of hinted at this before with what you're saying about the billions that have already been spent on our industrial chemical industry. But why? What is the competitive advantage? Why aren't the big chemical companies trying to do this?
Yeah. So the big insight for us, there was three big insights. One was we can actually use computational technologies to engineer these enzymes. So what we can do is actually model and predict how to design an enzyme using computers, right? Using AI, using ML. That is not a skill set that's commonly used in the chemicals industry. We just talked about how it's stagnated. It's stagnated because there's no need to invest in this piece of the puzzle. That's number one. Number two is the process piece of it. We had to completely change the way that these processes are done. If you look at a chemical process today, it's maybe 12, 15 single unit operations. We had to say, well, why do you need these? Why do you need every single one of these operations? And the answer is you don't. So we basically deleted as much of it as we could, and now we're down to 3 unit operations. That simplicity is actually the beauty of this technology, is you take away as much of it as you can. And the third piece of it is figuring out, how do you locate these? Today, when you go to a chemical plant, it's just a massive. I grew up in Houston. My backyard was just a giant chemical plant. It is the size of an island, and so obviously, like, you have to transport that product somehow. So for us, that whole entire infrastructure that exists today is based on a logistics chain that presupposes that you have to produce centrally. What we believed was, by having a more efficient process, having only 3 unit operations versus 12 or maybe even 20 unit operations, we can actually make smaller chemical plants. Now, mind you, this is all relative, right? Smaller in the chemicals industry still looks big from a layperson, but relatively speaking, what we have kind of uncovered is that you can make smaller versions of chemical plants that allow you to actually have a distributed network of these things. So all of a sudden, the logistics hurdle that you traditionally see in chemicals is largely gone.
So you just don't have to transport these things long distance anymore. You can produce them at the point that
Precisely.
You would want to use them.
I'll give you an example. Our Houston facility. This one's is funny. Our biggest customer from our Houston facility is a mile and a half away from our production site. And literally, I joke that I'm going to get my Toyota and give them the product itself, but that's really what it is like you're shipping this product down the street. And that, to me, is the key unlock in this space. No one cares about the technology. Like, fundamentally, you just want a product, and you want the product at a good price point, and it performs, and you want it on time. All of a sudden, if we're successful in having multiple versions of these bioforges, the logistics chain becomes so much simpler. And when you look at the pricing of chemicals, 50% of the pricing is tied into the logistics chain: safety, handling, actually getting the product to your end user, containerizing it. If you can remove a lot of those barriers, you've now taken away 50% of the headache associated with just getting your product. Yeah.
So does that mean that you are a competitor to the established chemicals industry, or do you see yourselves more as a partner?
I would be foolish to say that we're not competitive. Of course, at the end of the day, there's a finite number of customers that we're going after, that we are competing against. I think we can be partners. I think the future of this industry is going to be predicated on these bigger companies that have massive customer footprints teaming with production centers like ours to give them the opportunity to have more localized delivery of product. That said, I think this is going to be an evolving piece of the puzzle. I think really what we're competing against isn't these companies. It's a philosophy. It's this philosophy that the chemicals industry doesn't have to be as massive and capex heavy. And we're fighting that by creating smaller, more efficient processes.
Now, you used the term when we were talking there about a bioforge for one of your production facilities.
Yeah.
Could you just help our listeners visualize that? What does a bioforge look like?
Absolutely. I love that because we've got Lego versions of the Bioforge. But basically, what it is, it's a 10,000 square feet space. It's like looks like a warehouse space, and it's just 3 big tubes. 3 big tubes. That's it. It looks like a mini SpaceX, Falcon rocket, but it's a cylinder, and there's 3 cylinders across this whole entire facility, and you've got these big tanks that hold product. That is it. It's very, very simple. Yeah.
So completely different from
completely,
what
yeah.
idea of a chemical plant would be.
I'll paint the picture of what a chemical plant looks like in Houston. Looks like a city. You've got piping, interconnections everywhere, lights, flare gases. It looks like an organism, like a city that's actually living, because of the complexity of it. When you come to our Bioforge, what you'll see is what's not there, which is the empty space. Yep.
I think you in the early days of Solugen, you started out by focusing on hydrogen peroxide.
Yes.
And can you explain how selling hydrogen peroxide into the niche market of float spas was the strategy that you adopted?
Yeah.
How did that come about?
So it was not very glamorous. We had a small reactor. It was a PVC reactor. It was a 6-foot pipe. Couldn't make much product. But what we knew was that there was a market that would take this product. And that market happened to be in our backyard. And so what we did was we looked at all of the different markets where peroxide are used, and we overlaid where we had access to the customers for where our PVC reactor at the time was. And that was spas. So float spas, which are, isolation chambers. They use really high salt concentration to keep you afloat. But then they use peroxide to clean up that water. So we went and talked to every single float spa customer that we could. And we said, hey, would you use this peroxide that is cleaner, made in a cleaner way, but we can deliver it to you when you need it at the right time? And then all of a sudden, they said, yes, that's the biggest problem we have, because they had to order it through a distributor who's buying it from another distributor, who's getting it from a service company, who then gets it from the manufacturer. So there was, 3 or 4 different hands, exchanging of hands for the product. But all of a sudden, what we said was, hey, we have the ability to give you this product when you need it at the price that you want it. That was exciting to them. And so that's where we said, while this is not the most glamorous market, right? Maybe not even the biggest market, we captured 80% of that market in the span of 12 months. And there are a lot of float spas that we were able to capture because of it. So that's where we started. But the concept there was what mattered most, was this model could work. The end user could get their product when they wanted it, instead of being at the behest of a big chemical company. If you look at trying to order peroxide, or really any chemical today, what will happen is this. The producer will say, you will get your product in the month of October, potentially on the 2nd or 3rd week. So all of a sudden, your customer experience is terrible, right? Yep. So the net promoter score in the chemicals industry is negative. It's precisely because of this problem. There's no predictability on your supply chain. And so what ends up happening is you're effectively left to the devices of the manufacturer and the distributor. What we said was, if there is a way for us to focus on the customer experience in the chemicals industry, then the technology is worth it. It wasn't, let's build the technology and then it will matter to the customer. It was, what does the customer need to feel that they will give a good net promoter score? Then that technology will support it. And that's exactly this, what we call like last mile type support on the product side.
So talk us then through the journey from those early days of the float spas as customers to where you are today, and products you're producing, who the customers are.
So we started with peroxide in the float spa market. Then we went through Y Combinator, raised a little bit of money, scaled up again.
Y Combinator is a provider of capital to early stage companies.
It's
right?
a Dropbox, Airbnb. The really good companies have come out through it, but it's called seed investing. A small amount of money was put in. So we had a little bit of money to go and scale up from our PVC pipe to something that was a little bit more professional looking. So what we did then was we did the same exact exercise. We said, what market, now that we're at this scale, what market will be best suited for this product, knowing that we have a limited capacity to produce and that the price point should be higher than traditional industrial grade? So we did what anyone would do, and we went into wipes. We sold our product to wipes manufacturers because they were paying a good dollar per gallon for the peroxide, and it was small enough volume that our pilot plant could capture a good percentage of the market. So we worked with wipes manufacturer to launch wipes products using our peroxide, and what ended up happening was they actually ended up acquiring our wipes private label business. And that was how we hacked our way from like a 5-year sales cycle to a 2-year sales cycle, because we got a contract with that supplier. So then we were able to say, okay, now we've got an offtake contract for this peroxide. There's something here. There's something bigger happening here. That's when we graduated to the industrial grade markets. So if you look at our history, it's really a history of scale, right? Starting from PVC, float spa, pilot plant. A pilot plant is really a plant that's subscale, kind of small, very small footprint, but that pilot plant was supporting the wipes industry. Now we graduated from that into what we call a proper bioforge. So this is a very well scaled 10,000 square foot production facility. That's where we really are today is the industrial market. So the customers that we have today are not float spas. The customers that we have today are water treatment. So think municipalities, think industrial water treatment. That's a biggest chunk of our market. The other sector of customers that we go after are in the construction industry. So obviously we've graduated from peroxide now. We've graduated from peroxide to organic acids, which is really a much bigger market, but that organic acid is used in multiple end industries. And what we've done is we've focused that organic acid product in areas where location matters a lot. Construction, location matters a whole lot because there's these organic acids are used on site. At the construction sites. So where we are in Houston today, a lot of our customers are in the construction industry. The biggest, I guess, chunk of customers for us are in the water treatment space. And again, it's more localized. So we're trying to bring this idea that localized production is actually what you need to succeed in this market. Yeah.
And in the summer of 2024, you hit quite a big milestone securing this conditional loan from the US Department of Energy for over $200 million to build a new bioforge in Minnesota.
Yes.
For context, Tesla also received a similar loan from the Department of Energy back in 2009 to help build Fremont, now the largest production facility for autos in the US. Many said that loan was an inflection point for Tesla. Is this loan for you more about the dollars, or is it what it signifies, the endorsement from the government commitment to this type of technology?
Dollars help. I'm not gonna lie, dollars definitely help. But I would say here the process that we had to go through, right? We really started we spun out of MIT in 2016 and really got going in 2017. So for us, in a span of 7 years, to take a technology that didn't exist to a technology that could be underwritten by the U.S. government, that was a very significant milestone. I think that was the fastest from no technology to a technology that had a readiness level that the government was willing to back it. The process that we had to go through for that was, maybe I'm a glutton for pain, but I loved it because it was the most diligence that we've ever had to do as a company. We literally had people staying in our production facility 24/7 for 2 weeks to see every single production number that we were making. It was 18 months of diligence where they had to look at every piece of our business from technology to commercial to how we operate as an organization. And once they felt comfortable with that, they would give us the stamp of approval for this loan. So the money, yes, great. But what's more important is it's almost like, okay, this technology has made it.
Yep.
It's here now. It's here today. Yeah.
So pivoting slightly, I want to talk about culture at Solugen. It's something we focus on a lot in our research process. I look back at the first research note we wrote on you in 2021. I said part of what we think makes Solugen special is that they've approached this problem from a fundamentally different point of view. So that was our take on what makes you special. But can you talk about how you think about culture, what enables you and your team to have this relentless pursuit in achieving your goal?
Yeah.
And how do you ensure that everyone is aligned and focused on that mission?
Yeah. We've learned a lot, I'd say, in the last 7 years. I think it's really like three buckets of how I look at it. The first bucket is you start with the engineering culture. Traditionally, when you look at a chemical company that is bringing a new technology or new process to market, one, it takes 15 years to do that. We did it in 11 months with our site in Houston. The way we did that was this philosophy called follow the project, which means we have engineers that we actually put into the lab, meaning these are chemical engineers that knew nothing about biology or anything. And we said, hey, you're going to go into the lab and you're going to learn how to do the biology. Once that biology is at a point where we can scale it up, you're going to follow that biology and you're going to go build it in the pilot plant, the demonstration unit. Then when you do that, you're going to follow it to the bigger scale. So basically we have this idea that you follow the project through where traditionally you have handoffs. and handoffs to me are the death of innovation, right? Because now you have no context of what idea maze you had to go through to actually learn along the process. So that's number one. Number two is we call this idea of mission to metrics, which I think we talked about a little bit earlier. But the idea is that you're integrating, when you vertically integrate like we do, you're going to the end customer with a product from a new technology. You, by necessity, you have a very diverse working population, meaning you've got scientists, engineers, and operators. And they all have different educational levels. They all have different life experiences. And all of them are trying to figure out how they fit into the bigger puzzle of what we're trying to do. So what we've done is we've formalized this idea of mission to metric, which is, hey, here's the mission for the company in the next 12 months. Not the vision. The vision is like, we have to decarbonize this, but the mission is, what is the tangible thing that we have to solve in the next 12 months for us to be successful? Fantastic. Now break that down to roles and responsibilities across this project stream. And that's why I started with the engineering example. Walk me through how every single one of these is coming down into a role, a responsibility, and finally a metric. So if you talk to, I don't know, a receptionist at Solugen, you say, how's what you're doing helping the mission this year? And they'll be able to tell you, oh, if I'm able to answer this many calls and screen this many phone calls and have this many folks that don't actually come into the office, but we actually like are able to kind of triage, then I'm helping the engineering staff not be bogged down in sales calls or things of that nature, which means that I can actually help them accelerate their progress to hitting their metrics. So we break everything down to the most minute part, and that makes everyone's life easier because you're not guessing about how you're contributing to the overall success of the organization. That's the second piece. And the third piece is, and this is a bit controversial, but we call it the morphing org chart. It goes back to the project. So our org chart will change every 12 months depending on the highest priority project at the company. So what we have is you've got an engineering manager who's leading a team of salespeople, which sounds bizarre, but for that project, it makes the most sense because they have to understand the technical nature of the product before they can go sell it. Now, in another 12 months, that project may have hit a steady state. Now we transition to the next project, and that culture, the org chart is going to reflect what the project is. So it's a very project-driven. The project pulls the company, not the organization pushing the project. Yeah.
Now, I guess if you think about how we came to meet, the backstory to that was actually via the founder and CEO of Zipline,
yes,
Keller Rinaldo.
Yeah.
He was coincidentally the first ever guest on Invest in Progress, Series 1, Episode 1. Could you just tell us about your relationship with other founders such as Keller who are tackling equally challenging projects? Do you share stories and war wounds? Is there a support network amongst entrepreneurs as you go on the journey from a startup to the various stages of maturity?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Keller, we have a standing call where we basically share war stories, I guess you could say. They started in 2012, so I'd say he's got a few more reps under his belt than I do, and I look up to him as an entrepreneur. But we're solving different challenges. But when you reduce a problem down to like the fundamental, what are the three things that make this problem challenging? It's always the same thing. It's people, it's, at least in the technical world, it's engineering, and it's capital. That's it. For us, that's what always comes down to. And every single one of those, when you can reduce the problem to that, every founder who is successful can talk that language in the technical context. So yeah, I think with Keller, he's helped me a lot with people design, particularly around performance management. He's got a really good philosophy at the company of Zipline where performance management, it should not be a surprise. No one should be surprised by if they're doing well or not doing well, hence the mission to metrics. That's the North Star for us. On the actual engineering side, Keller actually taught me about this whole idea of like handoffs. Like handoffs are what kill companies. When you start trying to put departments in a company that's sub 1,000 people, it doesn't make any sense, right? Like you're not going to execute at a fast pace then. You've just created silos for no reason. And on the capital side, Keller has, I'm using Keller as an example because I talk to him the most, but he's given me like a lot of advice on thinking through how to talk about the company because not everyone's going to want to talk about the chemienzymatic process and the yield that we can, right? Like that's, at the end of the day, it's just simplify it down to like, what are the most fundamental things that people care about? Yep. Why is this technology important? And put numbers on it so that people can relate to it in a much easier way. Yeah.
So what are the biggest challenges that you've faced to date? You started in 2016.
Yeah.
do you think the Garob of 2016 when the company was founded is different to the Garob of 2024? How have you evolved as a leader?
He's got a lot more scars, I'd say. He's got a little more fibrosed, I'd say. No, I think the one thing, there's really interesting insight I've been thinking a lot about, which was in the last few years, the company grew a lot, and there was almost this like unspoken rule that you have to corporatize, that you have to become like a segmented, org chart driven type company, and we did that. We did that for 2 years, and it's not consistent with how fast we want to achieve our goals. In fact, what's most consistent is maintaining that ethos of 2016, being like, I don't care what my title is. I am going to go turn this wrench because that needs to happen. We kind of let ourselves stray away from that, I guess, during the COVID years, just because it was easier when you're at home and in your own head. But now we're coming back to this culture of everyone can do anything, right, at this company. It doesn't matter what your title is. So that's one thing. The second thing is on the commercial side, coming as technologists, right? Sean and I are just hardcore nerds. You probably got that by now, but like we're hardcore technologists, and we always just think about the world as, well, this technology should exist. Right. But at the end of the day, when you're talking to a customer, and this is where I learned from my father, no one cares, right? No one fundamentally cares how good your technology is. So what I've learned now is go for the customer pull. Go where the pull is the strongest, because the technology will follow once you understand what the customer pull is. And the third piece of it is, it sounds silly to say it, but kind of assume that you're the dumbest person in the room, always. The second like we started thinking that we were, like we know the science better, that's when things start to fall apart. And so what we've done is surrounded ourselves with people that are not afraid to be brutally honest to me and Sean. That's helped a lot as well. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we always finish with the same question. What does the world look like if Solugen succeeds?
Yeah, I think if Solugen succeeds, I kind of see three big buckets. One is we can actually have decarbonized or carbon negative cities. And what I mean by that is if you walk around a city, I'm in Edinburgh today and just walking around, it's beautiful. The concrete, the insulation, the roofs, all of that should be made from carbon pulled out of the atmosphere. That's what I fundamentally believe. And if we're successful in doing that, you could truly have a city that is carbon negative or at least carbon neutral. The second is thinking about really going back to my origins as a physician. What if the materials and chemicals that exist in our society don't get into our waterways, or don't, like PFAS, or don't get into our bloodstream like microplastics do, but in fact degrade before they can even do any of those things? You actually have a safer environment around you. And the third piece is really, I think about it as like equality of opportunity. If you have the ability to have regional production, right, at the city level, potentially even smaller than that, of bioforges everywhere, all of a sudden you create labor pools that didn't exist before, right? These labor pools could be done in, like, for instance, that we're doing in Marshall, Minnesota. It is an economically depressed area because manufacturing left from that region. Farming and manufacturing are leaving. But now we have this opportunity to democratize access to chemicals production. So every single pocket in society can have access to the same exact chemistry that anyone else does. And from that point of view, I view, if we're successful, chemicals become cool, right? Going back to the old 1930s and 1940s chemicals are something people want to be around because it's going to be something that they know is safe, and it's going to be something that they know that they can help innovate and build a better future for everyone. So that's really what I think the future looks like if we are successful. Yeah.
A really dramatic impact across so many different parts of society.
Yeah, it's massive. It starts small, right? But the impact, if it compounds itself throughout the value chain in a way that is really hard to predict. Yeah.
Well, Gaurav, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
So, Tom, what a great kickoff to season 3. And I think that conversation with Gaurav really epitomizes what this podcast is all about. And so we finish off each episode by trying to give the listeners an insight into what the Scottish Mortgage perspective is on these businesses. And we always ask the managers the same 5 questions about the investment case for the starring company. So, Tom, as Garib alluded to, it was Keller at Zipline that introduced us to the company. And so, thinking about idea generation, is this example indicative of how we find ideas in the private markets more broadly?
It is partly. I think what's most important is how you behave as an investor. You can talk about being long term, you can talk about being supportive, but what do you actually do? Because founders talk to one another, they get ideas from one another about who to go speak to, where to think about getting money from. And so I think living up to the promise of what you do is the most important thing. And then beyond that, it is about about those relationships. It's about, both those ad hoc introductions, but also, if you're thinking about a particular area, understanding more about it from one investment can take you to, ideas of companies you want to approach. So I think it's broad, but I think being there, being involved in the market, and actually living up to the promise of what you say you'll do are the most important things.
And I think we got a really great flavour of Garib's background, his vision, and how he runs the business from that kind of operational perspective. But from your perspective, what does Garib and his co-founder Sean bring to the company that increases its chances of success?
Well, go back to the sort of founding moment, if you like. There's not many people that would be sat an evening out with friends and then decide to start a company. So these are by definition unusual people. But then I think I think the framing of the question was right. It's what do the two of them bring? And I think the crucial ingredient here is totally different perspectives about the same problem. That you have somebody who's coming from understanding the chemicals industry, has that background, understands catalysts, and then you have somebody coming from a biological background and understands what biological processes can bring to making chemicals. And you combine those two things, and you have a totally different approach. Now, there is that's really important at the start, but I think it remains really important because what you're trying to do in the business, the culture of the business, is you're trying to bring together people from a totally different disciplines and have them work effectively together. And so I think that's don't underestimate the challenges that are involved in doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you touched on this in your discussion, but Solugen's positioning in this industry as a competitor or a potential partner to the big existing players. And Garib said it's potentially a bit of both. But in your eyes, I mean, what is the company's competitive edge in an industry that Garib sort of describes as quite stagnant?
Yeah, well, I think, go back to the previous question, I think there's a really important part of it, which is to do with just the whole approach to the problem.
Yeah.
These aren't people from the chemicals industry.
Yeah.
They're coming at the task with a different approach. And what does that mean? Well, if you're trying to produce the chemicals that they are today with just using traditional catalysts, then you need a lot of energy.
Yeah.
And if you're using a lot of energy, that means a lot of cost. But likewise, if you're trying to do this just from a biological process standpoint, then there's a very high cost for the enzymes and so forth involved. So it's actually the combination of the two, and the intellectual property and the know-how that goes with that. And then that allows them to be producing chemicals at low cost. And that's, I think, really the heart of the competitive edge.
And I guess then with any company that is trying to do something different and disrupt an industry, there is always going to be challenges. So in your opinion, Tom, what are the threats to this business? What is the most significant? And why do you think the company is well placed to overcome those challenges?
Well, I think the biggest threat is their ability to execute.
Yep.
They've shown in the early stages of the business that they were scrappy, they were competitive, and going out and finding end markets for their initial products.
Yeah.
But I think the skill set that you need as a business changes over time as you scale. And I think being disciplined about where you focus your time and energy. But the opportunity is a big one, and their approach is very different. So I don't think it's about is somebody else going to do this better than they are. I think they have a very different approach. It's can they execute on that approach? Can they actually deal with the harsh realities of the chemical industry? Because one of the things we like about the business is that it's an approach which actually consumes carbon. It doesn't emit carbon. I think that would be a really important contribution to the chemicals industry. But the customers don't care about that. They're not going to pay extra because there's a green process here. There's no green premium. It's can they deliver a better or equivalent product at a better or equivalent price?
Yeah.
And that's got where they've got to aim for.
And then finally, Gareb said the mission was to make chemicals cool, which I loved as a phrase. And we've talked a lot about the size of the industry and what Solugen are doing to disrupt it. But from your perspective, how would you describe the scale of the opportunity ahead for Solugen from here?
Well, I'd say the scale of the opportunity is vast. It's so big it's a non-issue. Chemicals go into everything, and I think the challenge for the company is when you have such a broad waterfront, what do you go after? Yeah. And I think they've got to be really efficient in how they do that. Think through what are the highest value opportunities. Where is the traditional industry least efficient? Where can they have a real cost advantage with the approach that they have? And then you attack those niches, and you build scale. And as you build scale, you get more efficient, and then that allows you to broaden. So it's don't be distracted by the breadth of the opportunity. Yeah. Have focus, get scale, and then you can go after the blockbuster chemicals, the really huge volume opportunities. Where the industry is probably quite efficient today, but you can only do that if you've cracked the first several opportunities.
Perfect. Well, Tom, thank you for your insights and giving us the Scottish Mortgage perspective on Solugen. A big thanks to our guest today, Gareb Chakrabarti of Solugen, and to our investment manager, Tom Slater, for kicking off Season 3. Over the next 5 episodes, we'll be welcoming more visionary leaders from companies within the Scottish Mortgage portfolio. From AI-enabled drug discovery to the world's most trusted crypto platform, this season promises to bring to life our mantra of investing in progress. You can subscribe so you're first to hear when new episodes are released, and you can learn more about Scottish Mortgage by visiting our website, scottishmortgage.com. You've been listening to Invest in Progress. Thank you for joining us. Please note, capital expenditures, or CapEx, are purchases of significant goods or services that will be used to improve a company's performance in the future.